Hello, I figured it's been a while since I've recorded one of these videos, might as well do one of them again. Yeah, so the last time I did any of these videos I was doing kind of rankings and there hasn't been any sort of thing to rank, so I thought I would do some mid-season rankings. So I'm gonna make note right off the top of this. This is rankings up until the end of Austria. I know the British Grand Prix is passed. I didn't account for any of that information within all of the stats that are within this. So, and these drivers that I have over here, they've got really nothing to do with my order of things. They just happen to be the drivers that were easiest to find PNG files of. So let's get into it. I'll go over the same explanation. I know my system isn't perfect. I'm using still the same system that I would have used on my old power rankings for the 2022 season. If you haven't seen those videos, give them a check and see how we would have compared. But yeah, so let's get over here. So yeah, I've got 30 drivers ranked because pretty much 30 drivers have actually done most of the season so far. There's been teams not making changes every week. It's really nice to watch. And so yeah, so I've got all of my same systems up here, of how I'm kind of qualifying things. I don't really have actually any drivers in this category, but of course I do have drivers in this category who are no longer in their rookie season, so not looking too good for them. But yeah, so of course, yeah, I'll have those numbers in these red highlighted boxes again. I don't want this to be a super long video. I'm not looking to argue. I'm not looking to make super debates. It's just a mid-season ranking. I want to see how I'm doing so far compared to my preseason estimates. All right, let's get into it. I believe it's going to start with the bottom 6. We're not really looking to argue, like I said. We're just going to get right into it, going off of these factors. I completely forgot about this screen. Yeah, so these are all the things I used to dictate. So the one thing I really want to put in that can heavily change things, I think it heavily faulted one driver in particular that arguably could have been ranked higher, but yeah, so if you have a DNF where the driver probably could have avoided it, it heavily penalizes them compared to if it's something that's not their fault. If another driver outbroke themselves and took out someone else with them, they're not getting penalized for that. Only the driver who's at fault is getting penalized in this situation, and it's pretty heavily. So yeah, let's get into it. I think let's start with the bottom 6. So down in 30th, I put Roberto Ferraya, Alex Garcia, Ido Cohen, Piotr Wisnicki, who of course isn't even racing now. He's been replaced. I think it's only for a couple rounds, but yeah, he didn't do the last race. Hunter Yaney, another driver who hasn't done the last he only missed Britain so far, I think. And then Tommy Smith. So yeah, these are all drivers that have just basically been pretty easily at the bottom. I don't think anyone really gonna argue that too much. Let's move on. Next 4, I've got Sofia Florsch, Rafael Villagomez, Oliver Gray, and Hugh Barter. Now, of these, I'd say I'm kind of shocked that Villagomez is so low. He's a returning driver, so that's got to be pretty disappointing for him. And Oliver Gray, I kind of thought he was actually going to do all right, if I'm remembering my preseason predictions well. I think he won like British F4 or something like that. I can't really remember too well, and he's part of the Williams Driver Academy, so to be this low at this point in the season, that's not really too good of a reflection so far. Moving on to my next 4, and we're starting to get to the middle of the pack drivers now. I've got Kalen Frederick, Nikita Bedrin, Solov, and Mary Boya. So there's 2 drivers here, if I'm remembering my preseason predictions right, that heavily dropped. That's Solov and Frederick. And I think both of them are part of ART, correct? Yeah, Frederick and... yeah, so I think part of them are ART. Both of them might be ART. I can't remember Solov is. He's driving a blue car. But yeah, those are the 2 drivers I think that both dropped heavily. The biggest drops from my preseason predictions. I think I was just expecting ART to be much better. And that's part of why they ended up dropping. I think it's going to be another set of 4 before we move into sets of 2. So I just wanted to get most of the field out of the way. It's F3. There's not really too much to debate unless you're really at the top of the field or have money. You're not progressing anyways to F2, which a lot of these drivers do actually have a chance to progress. But I want to start really debating once I get to those drivers. So, oh, I went backwards. There we go. And the next four, I put Johnny Edgar, Christian Mansell, Taylor Barnard, and Ollie Goethe. So, I think the one surprise there might be Ollie. I think it could be argued he could be a little bit higher. I think of these drivers, probably the most disappointed would be maybe him or Johnny Edgar. I think especially since Edgar got dropped by the Red Bull program, he was probably really hoping to have a nice bounce back season. But that doesn't really seem to be the case with MP Motorsport. He's just kind of that middle of the pack driver. It's not really he hasn't really been bad per se, but especially in F3, if you're not near the top of the field, it's very Ricky Bobby to say, but if you ain't first, you're last kind of thing. So unless you're fighting for wins and podiums every week, you're not really going to get considered for the futures, which is kind of unfortunate, but such is the case. And now, yes, I can see, so that was the last set of 4. We're going to move into a couple sets of 2. Going forward, though, so yeah, looking at some of these numbers at this point so far, you can see some of my drivers are actually tied. So Boya and Solov, I basically have them about the same. Barter and Frederick, they actually came out pretty close together. Yeah, so you can see some steep drop-offs here and there, but a lot of these drivers are really close together. Wisnicki and Cohen, those numbers are very close, etc., etc. I know I've got one other tie coming up where once I get into the top, the top 8, I would be doing one at a time, but since 2 drivers tied, I know I've got them together. So, yeah. Anyways, let's move on and continue with our list. So the next 2 I have here are Sebastian Montoya and Leonardo Fornaroli. So this is where I was actually pretty surprised. I kind of underrated Montoya going into the season. I thought it was a lot of hype, but he has actually been pretty good. Not great, obviously, considering I still have him down in 11th for this season, but you know what? He's been all right. The kid's been all right. And is this his first full season in F2 or second? I can't remember. I think it might be his second. Anyways, let's move on. We're in our top 10 now. I think it's going to be another set of 2 before we get into looking at individuals. Okay, I was right about that. So yeah, in P10 I put Kyle Collette, and in P9 I put Gregoire Saucy. So yeah, I think these are, as much as my rankings of them are not too bad, P9 and P10, you would think those are points positions. For these drivers being returning drivers, again, that's one of those, they want to be at the top. If they're not at the top, it's probably not going to go too well in the future. They might have to start looking towards GT cars or something like that. Anyways, let's start getting into some of these individual rankings. Who do I have in P8? Let's find out. Oh, I don't want that there. P8, I put Luke Browning, so you can see I've actually got some stats above my face now. So I got qualifying average 10.8, feature race 9.7, sprint average 9.5, average finish of 9.6. He's pretty consistent around that spot. He's getting points pretty consistently, at least based on these numbers. Yeah, you can see he's got 38 points there, good for P9 in the standings as of that point. It kind of lines up perfectly to put him right around that 8, 9, 10 mark. And yeah, he's got 1 podium to his name, which actually isn't that much compared to, I think, some of those drivers below might have podiums themselves or pole positions. But you know what? Browning's been consistent. Can't really fault him. And moving on to P7, I have Gabriele Mini. So this is the one driver who I was talking about might have been overtly penalized as of this point, considering it's the mid-season. I think he had 1 DNF. I think it was Austria, where it's it was kind of a racing incident, but I think he could have avoided it, so he got pretty heavily penalized in my spreadsheet. That kind of dropped him down a little bit, where I think he could have arguably been higher. So yeah, looking at the quality average, 6.8, 11.2 in the feature race, 10.8 in the sprint. Good for 5th overall fastest in qualifying and 9th overall races. So he's very fast. He's very, very, very fast. I think just that, like I said, that one DNF that happened to arguably could have been avoided. I think that just heavily penalized him in my system here. And all right, moving on to P6. I think this might be the tie. Nope, it's not. Franco Colapinto. Another guy who's been pretty good. Probably would have wanted more for himself than being around P6, but you know what? He's been pretty good still. Qualifying average of 7.0, feature average 10.4. Pretty good in the sprint of a 6.2. So it's like 6th in qualifying, 6th in average finish, P7 in points at this time. Pretty much puts him exactly right where he should be at P6. There isn't really much to debate there. My system, as much as I'm not actually personally ranking all of these, it's all completely a formula. Everything kind of lined up with this guy's right around this P6, P7 mark. There's nothing really to fluctuate, move away from. So maybe this one's the tie. Yeah, so these two drivers tied. So I don't have their stats above me to really compare each other because they were pretty equal. I think Marty might be another one of those drivers who he might have had a DNF at some point that could have been potentially avoided because he's had a pretty good season. I think as of this point he was P2 in the standings after Austria. But yeah, stuff happens, hasn't been overtly consistent all the time. So I've got them both basically tied for P4 between O'Sullivan and Marty. Okay, let's move into P3. I've got Paul Aaron. So he's actually been pretty good, and I think, I can't remember where I ranked him in the preseason, but I wasn't expecting him to be as good as he's been. But then again, Prema is, of course, a very competitive team, so I shouldn't be too surprised. But yeah, he's been pretty good. P3 quality average, average finishing P5. Good for P5 in the standings. He's got a win and 3 podiums at that point. Yeah, he's a good driver. He's probably going to get into F2. P2, I put Dino Boganovic. Driver who I think I predicted him to win the championship at the beginning of the season. He's not had quite the season I was expecting of him. He doesn't have any wins yet. He's got 3 podiums though. But good for P2 in average qualifying, P3 in his average finish. He's been still very, very good. Maybe a little bad luck here and there. But yeah, he's got to step it up. I've got very high expectations of him. I think he could get into a Ferrari one day. But for now, he needs to just keep progressing, keep pushing. Of course, I don't think it's any surprise who that leaves in number 1. The guy who was running away for it for at least the first 3 rounds of the season. That's Bortoleto. Yeah. P1 average quality, P1 average finishing position rank. It's fairly obvious that he was going to be the top as of this point. I can't remember. What is the gap as of this point? I think he had like a 20 or 30 point gap to P2 in the standings. So, yeah, he's going to have to either really fall apart or someone's going to have to get absolutely hot if they want to beat him in this championship. It's still basically only just over halfway through the season. There's still, I think, 4 rounds to go. So I don't want to be writing it in yet, but Bortoleto did a really good job of establishing himself as the clear-cut contender. So there you go. So before we move on, of course, I'm going to show how I ranked each drivers again a little bit, and at the same time, how far off they are from my preseason predictions. So let's move into that. So you can see some drivers I had really close, some drivers I kind of had at least within the right little field and bubble. Some were dead on, some were not even close. So obviously the 2 biggest disappointments I'd say are right over here in Solov and Frederick. Like I was saying, I was expecting ART to be much better. My apologies if Solov isn't on ART. I'm not remembering that well off the top of my head, but I think he is. I know it's Frederick. I know it's Saucy. I think Solov was the 3rd driver. Yeah, so those were the 2 biggest disappointments. The 2 biggest surprises, I'd say, were Sebastian Montoya and Pepe Marti. I didn't really expect Marti to be as good as he's been. And yeah, I'd say at the same time, Luke Browning too. I thought Browning would be alright, but then again, he did jump the same amount. So yeah, that's kind of biggest winners of the season. Yeah, definitely Montoya, Marti, and Browning. Biggest losers of the season right now are Solov and Frederick. I know, of course, neither are at the top or at the bottom, but just from as far as expectations goes, that's who's done good, that's who's done bad. Now, of course, to see where that kind of puts them in their little tier system that I showed at the beginning of the video. So right now I have championship contenders, Bortoletto and Bogdanovic still. They've got their numbers there. Yeah, it's... Sorry about that. So yeah, I think as much as Bogdanovic, as of this point, I don't think he's P2 in the standings. I still think he's been the second best driver. I think he's got a chance to catch up. I think a couple drivers have a chance to catch up. Like, you can see any of these drivers in green, they're having great seasons. I won't be shocked at all if they get in, if any of those top 8 get into F2 next season. Won't be shocked one bit. I know there's always seems to be a surprise of, like, how did the guy who finished P20 in F3 get up into F2 with money, of course? But yeah, let's look through this. So let's look at these. So yeah, any of those top 8, they can get into F2 next year. As of this point, wouldn't really be arguing it. This midfield, yeah, no, they're just kind of there. And these guys at the back, in the case of some of these drivers, like at this point, I think Frederick and Villagomez, Hunter Yaney, Ito Cohen, it's time for them to start looking elsewhere and a future beyond open wheel cars, or at least open wheel cars in Europe. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But this is still the mid-season. There's still time to prove me wrong. Anyways, what are your opinions? Who would you put at the top? Who would you put at the bottom? Where am I completely wrong? Am I putting too much weight into small things, etc., etc.? Let me know your opinions. And thank you very much for watching.